Hello, my name is George Acevedo, and I'm one of the pastors here at Grace Church. And I'm so very excited that you and your small group have decided to join many groups in the life of Grace Church at all four sites in being a part of the Circle Maker. It's an exciting series. It's based on Mark Batterson's book, The Circle Maker. And right at the very beginning of the book, Mark Batterson reminds us that bold prayers honor God and that God honors bold prayers. Now, I've heard about bold prayers, and, about making bold prayers with God my entire Christian experience. For more than 35 years as I've followed Jesus, I've listened to those mature saints who have gone on in front of me in maturity tell me that I should pray these kinds of bold prayers. But frankly, I haven't always done it. My seasons of bold prayers have mostly come during seasons of darkness, during seasons of discouragement, when I've needed God most in my life, those kind of Death Valley days. And yet, the older I grow in my relationship with God, the more I find myself desiring to be the kind of person who prays bold prayers in the green pasture days as well as the dark valley days. I remember a season of my life, it was about 20 years ago now, that I find myself in one of those dark valley days. I was trying to discern from God what my future was going to be about. I am an ordained United Methodist pastor, and we work with our superintendents and our bishop in our assignments. And I knew that God was calling me to be a lead pastor, but frankly, I didn't want to do that. It was an issue of obedience for me. One of my very good friends, Joe McLaren, who's a pastor here in Florida, he challenged me to take a little notebook like this one, and in that notebook to jot down very specifically the kinds of things I wanted in my first assignment as a lead pastor. So I took out that little notebook one night, and I began to write out many things that I wanted to see in the church that I would lead. Now, frankly, the list was pretty impossible. It was a list of amazing kinds of things that I dreamed that any church could be. A church filled with young families and old families, a church with lots of children and youth, a church that was very focused missionally, both locally and globally, a church filled with small groups where people were living in community. I wrote down on that notebook a church that cared for the poor, the marginalized, the broken, the addicted. The list went on and on into the 20 different issues that I had written on that list. And then my friend Joe told me, he said, "George, you need to pray for that. Pray over that list every day." So I began to pray over that list. And as the system of our United Methodist Church works, I was assigned in the summer of 1996 to Grace United Methodist Church in Cape Coral, Florida. A church, frankly, that was struggling. A church that had had about 600 people in worship 5 years earlier, and my first Sunday there we had about 300 folks. It was a scary time for me, but I still had that list that Joe told me to make, and I kept praying over that list. Well, I got busy in ministry. I took the notebook, I put it in the desk next to my bed at home, and I left it there. And then for the next several years, I just got busy working and literally forgot about the list. At about year 5, I was digging through my chest drawers next to my desk, and I found the notebook again. I pulled it out and I began to look over the list, and sure enough, there were things on that list that I had prayed about 5 years earlier that had come true. You know, one of the things on my list was I prayed, because I was 36 years old, I prayed that there would be some wise mentors in my life. Men and women who had gone in front of me in ministry and who could help a young, wet behind the ears, first time lead pastor of a church. Little did I know that God would provide Pastor Ray Belkey and Pastor Paul Bissington to be an answer to my prayer, a prayer I had prayed 5 years before. Well, I took the book and I threw it in my desk of drawers, forgot about it for another 5 years or so. Right around our 10th anniversary, I found the notebook again, I pulled it out, began to pray through the list, and sure enough, you could check off the list. More and more things on the list had been answered by God. these bold prayers for a church that cared about the addicted had led Grace Church years later to start a Celebrate Recovery, a church that would have small groups. We had hundreds and hundreds of people in small groups at year 10. Over and over again, as I would go through my list, I'd see that my prayers had been answered. You see, God honors bold prayers, and God wants us to be men and women of bold prayers. About year 15, I pulled out the list again. And you know, almost everything on that list, over 20 items that were listed there, I could honestly say that God had answered and that Grace Church had become what we had prayed about over a decade and a half earlier. You know, God is in the business of wanting to answer our bold prayers. And my prayer for all of us as a church is that in these days we'll begin to pray bold prayers, because God really does answer bold prayers.